and my mother spent all day telling everybody at the hospital that we should name him Patrick Kelly Green because holiday names are really cool.
See, that didn't work out.
We're ready? Okay. All right. We good? Yep. Good evening. It is 6:00 p.m. and I call to order the March 16th, 2021 Board of Trustees meeting. Do I hear a motion to enter executive session to consider employment recommendations for the 2020, 2021, and 2021-2022 school years and to receive legal advice regarding a pending legal matter?
Madam Chair, I move that the board enter into executive session to consider employment recommendations for 2020, 2021, and also 2021, 2022, and to receive legal advice concerning a pending legal matter in the case of Alvin Berry versus Lexington County School District 1.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Thank you. We will now enter into executive session. All right, here we go. Do I hear a motion to conclude executive session and begin general session?
Madam Chair, I move that the board conclude executive session and begin general session.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Dr. Powers. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, the motion carries. I call to order the general session of the March 16th meeting. We are meeting tonight in compliance with CDC recommendations. The auditorium has been thoroughly cleaned and sanitized before the meeting and will be after the meeting as well. District staff will also sanitize the microphone before and after staff presentations or individuals speaking during citizens' participation. All board members, employees, or other individuals in attendance are encouraged to social distance and must wear a face covering at all times. The public is encouraged to watch the meeting on our YouTube channel. After the meeting, the district will follow its previously established process by posting a video of the meeting to the district's YouTube channel, Lex One video site, and our own website. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. I now yield the floor to Mr. Mike Anderson to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Madam Chair, fellow board members, staff, and guests, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Board members, you have received the minutes of the February 2nd and February 16th, 2021 board meeting. Other than corrections that have been received and made, are there any other corrections? Hearing none, the minutes will be accepted as presented. Do I hear a motion to approve 38 certified recommendations for the 2021-2022 school year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve 38 certified recommendations for the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Is there any discussion?
I was going to ask Mr. Stacy for an update on how we're looking for the 21-22 school year with open positions and retirements and all that good stuff.
We're looking like we're going to be real busy. Quite a few resignations and retirement, but not anything. I mean, it's like this time of year every year. Sorry. I did have them run a report for me last year from January 1st to December 31st of 2020. We had 132 certified resignations and 58 certified retirements for that time. So some of those were in the fall of this year. Since January of this year, so January to March, we've had 34 certified resignations and 20 certified retirements, 2 administrative resignations and 5 administrative retirements. So we're moving in that direction. We tonight, the recommendation with the 38 certified positions are really positions to fill holes we already know, but we're also putting some in a teacher pool so that as we go through the budget process and approve, new positions, we'll have people in play to be able to place them in those positions. So we got a lot of work to do between now and May 10th when contracts go out. And my staff reminds me on a regular basis.
Yeah, I know my memory is the resignations last spring were happening at a clip or a pace higher, as teachers had options. But this year's more in line with previous years or on the same pace as last year?
like I said, I don't know like how many resigned in January and how many,
Yeah.
you know, particularly this time of the year, we were in the middle of the shutdown.
Right.
So we didn't get a lot of resignations March, April, and May of last year. If you remember, they kicked in around June, July, and August. I do think that we've had some people that have been doing this for a while and have just decided that it's time. And so we'll have some young people all excited. We are working now trying to pull in all our student teachers and offering them those contracts that are interested in working in Lexington 1. So we're working hard.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work y'all's group's doing.
Any other discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve 50 administrative renewals for the 2021-2022 school year?
Madam Chair, I move the board approve the 50 administrative renewals for the 2021-2022 school year as recommended by Dr. Little and the senior leadership team.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Stacy, you want to just explain real quickly what the renewals are?
So these are the district directors, chiefs, and then the building level principals. So it's those principals, directors, and chiefs within central services in the schools. Next month, we'll bring to you the certified teacher recommendations moving forward. And it's just a renewal from 1 year to the next. Each administrator gets a 1-year contract, and so we just renew them each year.
Thank you. Is there any discussion, board? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve 4 administrative recommendations for the 2021-2022 school year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the 4 administrative recommendations as recommended by Dr. Little and the senior leadership team for the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. All right, during executive session, the board discussed a pending legal matter in the case of Alvin Berry versus Lexington County School District 1. Do I hear a motion regarding this matter?
Madam Chair, I move that the board accept administration's recommendation of option A regarding the pending legal matter in the case of Alvin Berry versus Lexington County School District 1.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. All right, is there any discussion? All right, board, all in favor of option A, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you. All right. Citizens participation, agenda item 8.0. Lexington County School District 1's Board of Trustees solicits the advice and counsel of its citizens. To encourage this participation, the board provides a citizens participation period during each of its regularly monthly board meetings. In order to speak, you must be the parent or legal guardian of a student currently attending a Lexington District 1 school, a taxpayer residing in the Lexington District 1 attendance area, an employee of the district, or a student currently attending a Lexington District 1 school. You may comment on agenda items, school operations, policies, programs, or other matters. You may not speak about specific individuals, whether students or staff. We want to remind you that this meeting is being live streamed and that the recording of this meeting will be part of the public record in perpetuity. We want to give everyone who came tonight an opportunity to speak, and in order to do that, I will call on each speaker by name and ask you to approach the lectern at the back of the room. The board will not reply to your remarks nor take any action during the board meeting in response to your comments or questions. You may address the board for up to 3 minutes. Please do not clap or make any comments, either while an individual speaks or after he or she finishes. As you came in tonight, you received a card to fill out to indicate if you wanted to speak. That card asks for your name, address, and other information. However, we will read out only your name, the town you reside in, and the name of the schools your children attend when it is your turn to speak. If you did not fill out a card but wish to speak, please hold up your hand and someone from the communications office will provide you with a card. My glasses are fogged up, so I can't really see. Anybody raising their hand? Okay. Anyone who is uncomfortable addressing the board in person may reach out to the board by email, telephone, or mail, and our contact information is available on the Lexington One website. We welcome all messages. All right. I think we have 3 cards this evening. First will be Debbie Heim. And Debbie wants to talk about board decisions and the communication with the community. She is the parent of a student at Lexington High School. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you, Board. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I appreciate, last month was my first time coming to a board meeting, and I appreciate several of you reaching out to respond back to the concerns about getting especially high school students back in school 5 days a week, face-to-face. We made great progress with 4 days. I'm still requesting 5 days. I know we're getting there with middle school and elementary after spring break, and we're all looking forward to that. I did want to clarify in the minutes from the last public meeting, it was not a Charleston study, it was a Medical University of South Carolina study about the Charleston School District that showed that there were no known student-to-teacher transmissions of COVID at all in the entire district, one of our largest in our state. No known transmissions of student of any age, including high school, to any adult staff at all. I think that's a very important point, especially as we request being back Fridays also. It's important that our children are in school. That's what this entire board is for. I guess just a side note, I found it interesting how little academics are discussed in this meeting. Maybe that was a fluke, we'll find out, but that's what the kids are there for. I do just want to note that the board is elected by our community. The accountability is through elections, but the decisions are to be made by the board. And when I look online to try to find how these decisions are made, for example, with all the COVID stuff, I'm having a hard time finding that. Maybe I'm not seeing it. I really appreciated over the summer when there were the videos that were done. I know Dr. Little did videos. That was very informative. There was one where the public was able to submit questions in advance. That's lovely. My question was not answered at all during that time or during the Q&A. One thing that might be very helpful, one thing that I'm requesting from the board is that we have more communication with the community. All the time, but especially when we have issues like COVID. Maybe kind of like a question and answer session or a town hall, but something so that the community can come. As I speak with other parents in this district, maybe they feel like it's maybe confrontational to come and approach here, and because you can't communicate back with me here, I can't ask you something and you can't answer it in this format. We really need to do something like that, perhaps once a season during the school year, 3 times a year, but something where the community can come and ask questions of the board. I talked to throughout all of the high school areas, Pelion, Gilbert, Lexington, Whitnall, all of that. I know administrators, teachers, students, parents, counselors at all of these places, and I ask them, what's going on? When do the kids go back? What's going on? And you know what they say? We don't know, we don't know, we don't know. And so we need to get back. We need to get back all the way, and I need the board to communicate clearly how these decisions are made and be accessible to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heim. All right, and next we have Matt Heim, and he indicated he really wasn't sure yet what he was going to speak about. And he is also the parent of a student at Lexington High School.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when my wife's 3 minutes would end, so. Yeah, I say thanks too. I do appreciate it. You know, it was really nice to see how quickly all of that happened, which also leads me to know that this board actually works and does things. So I think that's refreshing, and I do appreciate that. Parroting the same issues though, I talked to people. Some people even commented how surprised they were about how quickly we went back, and they needed things like cafeteria staff and bus drivers and those sorts of things. So I think that was surprising for everyone. What I'm really looking for is a plan going forward. I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, next week, 2 months, just kind of what the plan to get back to normal is. You know, obviously, you're looking forward, we're looking forward. Let's figure it out. Keep us posted, keep us informed. That's really what we're asking for. Also, it's interesting how elected officials work, especially here with a volunteer school board position. As far as I can tell, this is an uncompensated position. So I would expect the people who run for these positions are interested in the school district and making changes that are positive and good for the community and keeping it going forward. I grew up in a town called Boulder, Colorado. My dad was raised there. My grandfather was a dean at the university there. And I can't live in that town anymore because it changed. It changed wildly. In fact, everybody from high school that I went to doesn't live there. They live in the neighboring towns and the other places. And there's a phrase there, it's meeting someone who grew up in Boulder is like finding a unicorn. And I think that's very interesting just how that is. And most of the people I know in this community are transplants. This community is changing too, a lot, which is interesting. So it's gonna be interesting to see how things go forward too with the schools. One of the things that attracts people to this area, quite honestly, from all corners, the Northeast, the South, the West, the Midwest, is the schools. They say, what's the best school district in South Carolina? That's where we want to raise our kids. And you know what always shows up? This school district. It needs to stay really good if you want the growth, if you want people being here, if you want people admiring what we have, okay? And that rests on the board. I see 7 people here. Voting records aren't that hard to look up. There's a lot of homogeneous here with these voting records. I don't know if that's good or bad, I really don't. But I'm starting to pay attention and watch, and I guess time will tell where all this is gonna land. But it's just something to keep in mind. I talk to a lot of people too. I'm not sure they'll make it here, but they are paying attention and they talk to people. And circles interact, collide, and word spreads. So anyway, I appreciate the work that you do and look forward to the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Heim. All right, next we have Chelsea Snellgrove. And Chelsea is here to talk about, excuse me, Ms. Snellgrove, is here to talk about the environment. And she is a parent of a student at Red Bank Elementary.
I'd like to say welcome to the Heims, and I second a lot of what y'all said, and I feel what y'all said, and I appreciate y'all having the courage to come up here and speak. It's hard to come up here and speak, but I'm here today to encourage district leaders to take action on climate change. I'm not here to repeat the dire existential threats predicted by climate scientists if we fail to act. I'm sure you've all heard it before. But I am here to kindly ask you to take your heads out of the mud and show some cojones and take some action. As the leader or the autocrat of our public institution, during this time of tremendous local population growth, Dr. Little, our kids need you to think big as you strategically plan for a brighter future. Not just for 3 years from now, but for 300 years from now. I beg you to take more interest in environmental sustainability. Use some of that conference coin to network with other school leadership teams dedicated to solving the problem. Right now, school districts across the country are committing to finding practical solutions that reduce environmental impact. Why does Lexington 1 have such apathy? I don't think you truly realize the power or duty you have to make a difference. For starters, we should brainstorm ways to deliver efficient renewable energy to our schools. I saw an interesting segment on CBS News just this morning. In 2017, the Batesville School District in Arkansas implemented a solar panel program and installed nearly 1,500 panels on unused land in the top school canopies. The district immediately saved over $600,000 in utility costs. The panels also produced additional electricity that the district then sold back to the grid, which turned the district's over $250,000 budget deficit into a $1.8 million surplus. For the past 2 years, Batesville School District has given its teachers bonuses, adding as much as $15,000 to each teacher's salary. Even if you don't believe in climate change, I'm sure you believe in money. Renewable energy isn't just about the green of the earth, it's also about the green of your wallet. The bottom line is, it's damn near impossible to get a kid motivated to ace a test when he is feeling the weight of the world crumbling. Please act. Thank you.
Ms. Snellgrove, thank you so much for speaking tonight and also for your consistent voice on environmental issues. Thank you very much. All right, we're moving on to agenda item 9.0, which is action items. Do I hear a motion to accept the administration's recommendation to rename the new Lexington Middle School campus to Lakeside Middle School?
Madam Chair, I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation to rename the Lexington Middle School campus to Lakeside Middle School.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Salters, would you like to provide any information for us at this point?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'll just direct your attention to our screens. We just recap briefly, have Mr. Calhoun here, the principal of the current Lexington Middle School, and he will be the principal of this replacement facility as well. And just kind of remind you of the process. Of course, Administrative Rule FF-R governs the naming of schools, and that falls under your purview. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Calhoun here for a brief summary of kind of how we got to this point as a reminder. Again, we talked about this last board meeting, but I want to just put this back out in front of everyone if you don't mind.
Good evening, board. Thank you. And so just quickly summary, this was really a grassroots effort that came from us. It's coming from really from our families and the students that we currently serve and will serve for the next, however long, 50, 60 years. And so as we think about that, this came from our SIC. This came from our athletic families and our arts families. And just as I continue from the last time we had a conversation, I would say informal conversations that have come through my way are 25 to 30. And it's just, hey, Mr. County, I saw this happen, and I am so excited. We're so excited about this vision and that kind of thing. And the overall support for this, we say 80% in here of this, and there's certainly some people who have some tradition and love the Lexington Middle as we do, but we want to certainly honor that. But there's an overwhelming support in our community as far as the Lexington Middle School current attendance zone to really move forward in this direction. The other things I just want to remind you guys that we talked about is like this need of honoring Lexington Middle School through both as Jeff and I have walked through in the last month, some feedback and things like the current building that was Lexington High and then Lexington Middle and all the things that has been and how we can do that as we transition out. But also then just honoring the history of the culture of Lexington Middle School. And so, that was part of every group that we talked to. We talked about there's really no connection history-wise to kind of name for a namesake. And then we took that information and we developed some names that from our stakeholders. And so those 4 names that we gave you before: Lake Murray Middle School, Lakeside Middle School, North Lake Middle School, and then River Bluff Middle School.
And so again, tonight, after considering all the feedback that we've received throughout the course of this process and the feedback from the community that Mr. Calhoun just talked about, we're again recommending this be second and final reading to name the new facility Lakeside Middle School, preserving the LMS lettering there, but also some key elements of the history of Lexington Middle School would be moved into this facility. We had some conversations about what's going to happen to all the trophies with the Lexington Middle School name on them and those kinds of things, and those will be protected and displayed here at this facility going forward in the future. And also there'll be some, I'm sure, some opportunities to display those things as well over at the current facility, because it will be repurposed, and as we talked about in our bond referendum program early on, and will continue to serve students in some fashion here in Lexington District 1. So that way, I'm happy to answer any questions of Mr. Calhoun as well.
Board, are there any questions or comments that you would like to make?
It seems like we do get this question a fair amount. As far as choosing a mascot, that nothing is selected tonight regarding that, correct? This is just simply the renaming of the school, and then any mascotting that occurs comes at a later date with additional input, those kind of things. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And again, remind the group, Mr. Calhoun, how this started. My understanding, at least as a board member, is I was approached about a request to consider renaming just because of the feeder zones. And so I think this started as a request from our community. And obviously that request isn't unanimous, and that's where the struggle is. But I appreciate us being methodical and asking for input and building consensus. Because again, we need to represent the majority, even if we can't represent everyone, so to speak.
Powers, I appreciate that. It absolutely was a grassroots from the people. I think I mentioned before a meeting where Dr. Little, we had literally you guys had just approved the land purchase. And I can assure you, on Casey's mind, there's no like, oh, now we get to go rename something. This was, hey, Dr. Little, you got this land, what's the new name? And from there, it kind of like, okay. And then from that point, well, we need to gather feedback from our people. We need to hear what they got. We need to hear what community members say. And yeah, it's not a unanimous in any decision, but overwhelmingly that has come from our own stakeholders, our people who got elementary kids coming up, as that feeder pattern now feeds River Bluff solely. That certainly has come from them, and feel like that's kind of as we move forward, a recommendation. It's to represent the families that are in the building now and to come.
And I don't want to speak for the whole board, but I know it wasn't on my radar, and I don't think it was on any other board member's radar, a name change. But as our community has advocated for it, we have to respond to that. So,
thank you.
And Dr. Powers, I would say, just kind of a firsthand experience. Pre-COVID, when my daughter would go to her cheerleading competitions, she was a Beechwood cheerleader, and of course they typically stick around and cheer for the team that they feed into, if you will. And so, you would have them all kind of grouped together, and it just visually looked odd when you had Lexington Middle School girls who were wearing the blue and gold cheerleading outfits, and they were sitting before the River Bluff cheering for them as their varsity team that they feed into. It even visually felt a little clunky. And so, I definitely saw that sort of firsthand. So I think obviously a correct move.
I'll quickly mention, Dr. Little and I have had a conversation. There's something about the Lexington brand, and that's statewide known. I mean, if you go around, if I wear my L, hey, you work at Lexington High School? Because the incredible accomplishments that have come through there. And so we're not trying to take away. It's just, as we move in a different direction, we really do feel like there's a rebrand that's just necessary through that.
Well, and I just want to add, so, my heart is Lexington Middle School. I attended there. My family moved to Lexington, and Lexington High School was still in that building. The next year, it switched over to Lexington Middle School when the new high school opened. I attended there. My mother taught there. So many of the former teachers there, retired teachers, are some of my favorite people on the planet, and I've talked to a lot of them through this. And there is, nostalgia and heritage and history is very important. But I really feel what you've relayed to us, just this strong passion that the current students and the current families and the up-and-coming students and families have expressed about wanting this identity that belongs to them. it's been very persuasive. And so, there's an emotional part of it that's, is kind of hard. But I also really feel like it's important for us to respond to the students that we're serving now. Anyone else with any conversation or comments? All right, board, we have a motion. Dr. Guyton, would you mind reading the motion again? Just
Sucker.
Yes, I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation to rename the new Lexington Middle School campus to Lakeside Middle School.
thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, and the motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, 9.2, do I hear a motion to accept the Audit Selection Committee's recommendation for an audit firm to perform district audits?
Madam Chair, the Audit Selection Committee recommends that the board retain the firm of Burkett, Burkett, Certified Public Accountants, PA, to perform independent audits of the school district for fiscal years ending 2021, 2022, and 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Henson, and that was a committee motion, and so it does not need a second. And so now we will have discussion. Mr. Salters, would you like to lead that for us, please?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the board. Of course, you had a subcommittee work with myself and Dr. Lowell to review proposal responses for our comprehensive annual financial report selection, and we did that, went through that process and scored those offerings. And as you are aware, the firm does an independent audit each year of the district's financial systems and several of our other programs, including our foundation and so forth. So, with that, the recommendation was made to select Burkett for the next 3-year term.
Thank you, Mr. Salters. Is there any discussion, board?
I just had a question about how the meeting was noticed. This is Jada. Did we ever find out if that was posted on the district's website?
It was not. I'll let Mr. Salters explain that.
Ms. Garris, it was noticed in compliance with the State Fiscal Accountability Authority FOIA guidelines, which say that specifically that the notice must be posted either in a publicly accessible location, which it was, at our office of the procurement officer, and on a centralized web page if the district has a web page for that purpose, which we have never established a web page for that purpose. And so all of our notices go up on a board in our outside our procurement office, which is in a public building, which is in compliance with the posting requirements.
Was notification sent to the news media?
It's not required to do that.
I would argue that.
Well, if you would, I'll give you a copy of this document. This is the State Fiscal Authority, Accountability Authority's meeting notice guide, FOIA meeting guide.
But the Freedom of Information Act requires
which
that.
Is the FOIA meeting guide right here.
To be posted on the website, and it has to be, notice has to be
Not
given
for
to
a procurement, it doesn't. This is what is followed.
But this was a public meeting of a public body,
This was a subcommittee of the board,
right, which means.
which is doing a procurement selection. We were following a procurement process.
I would argue that not noticing the meeting publicly is a FOIA violation.
We did notice the meeting publicly.
Not with the news media and not on the district's website.
Okay, and I think that we have documentation that supports what the administration did. We can.
We can.
Yes.
Sure.
Is there any other comments or conversation, discussion, questions for Mr. Salters or for the committee members?
I think having served on the subcommittee, I would offer up that there probably does need to be some board discussion regarding the RFP, the request for a proposal, because as a part of that, the entities did submit multiple options within the proposal. And so, for example, the firm offered up Burkett. They offered an option A and an option B, if I remember correctly. And essentially, the main difference between the two was option A included the ability to do a procurement audit annually, and option B allowed it for every 3 years. Now, we obviously had some discussion regarding this. My personal viewpoint is, I'd rather know about something at month 12 as opposed to month 36, and the cost was fairly negligible to do a procurement audit every 12 months as opposed to every 36. And so if I need to in the form of a motion, I can put forth for option A with Burkett, and Burkett.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Salters, is that, do you need the board's decision-making on that?
So I'll just point out, the reason it's set up the way it has been is the state procurement guidelines require a 3-year audit. It's certainly within the board's purview to do an annual audit. And so if that's what you would like to do, you can certainly do that. I will say it's a nominal cost associated with that, but it's not a nominal work effort. That has a pretty significant impact on the procurement staff to do that. So, which is certainly at the pleasure of the board. We're happy to do that. So, if you want to amend your motion or just direct us to do that, we can certainly do that. Either way.
I guess I'd like to understand a little bit more out of those every 3-year procurement audits, the findings and the opportunities. So, do we want to make a decision tonight, or can we understand that a little bit better? I'm not sure out of every 3 years procurement audits if there are findings or the opportunity, because again, it sounds like from a consulting perspective there's cost, but from a time perspective there's significant cost.
Yeah, and you don't have to make a decision on that tonight if you don't want to. That's certainly up to you. With respect to findings, as we discussed, Dr. Guyton, in the previous 3-year procurement audit, you recall there was a finding related to ratification of unauthorized procurements that involved signatures not being applied to those forms. And that happened over a 2-year period of time. And then when I took over, we rectified that. And obviously, to Dr. Guyton's point, had you found that out year 1, you wouldn't have had year 2 with that issue. But that's the conversation that we had in our meeting.
Can we proceed with the vote on the selection and then maybe do follow-up?
Yeah, you wouldn't have to take a formal vote.
It's
It's just how you,
I'd like to know the staff cost, resource cost for us to do an annual procurement audit. And then we can marry that with the additional cost between option 1 and option 2 and make a decision at a later meeting whether to do that. Would that be all right, Dr. Guyton?
Yeah, no, I just bring it forth because, I think it's deserving of conversation just based off of process and, just the fact that we are a growing and expanding organization. And, with that comes challenges in and of itself. And so, if we can stay ahead of the game, certainly that would be desirable. But by no means do we have to, I agree, I don't think we have to decide on that tonight. But I would say that it is a decision that does need to be brought forth at some point.
Mr. Salters, what would the time frame be that we would need to make that decision?
Well, I think it would be helpful for us to know that, within a month or two. So we would just circle back with you guys with some information next month so that you can make some decision on that.
Okay, all right. So we have a motion to accept the Audit Selection Committee's recommendation for an audit firm, Burkett. Is there any other discussion, Board?
Yeah, I make a motion that we table the recommendation for an audit selection committee recommendation until we can figure out if the meeting was properly noticed and until we figure out the cost for option A and option B.
We have a motion to table the motion on the table. Is there a second? A motion to, yes. Do we have a second? Okay. Board, we have a motion and a second to accept the Audit Selection Committee's recommendation. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Jada.
All right, thank you. And the motion carries. All right. Moving on to 9.3, which is ad hoc committee to review policy GCF, GCFR, professional staff hiring, and policy GDF, GDFR, support staff hiring. And this on the agenda belongs to Dr. Guyton.
Madam Chair, I will defer back to you for the recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. And so following up on the motion that was approved by the board at our February 16th meeting to establish an ad hoc committee to formulate policy revisions for policy GCF, GCFR, GDF, and GDFR, I nominate Dr. Kyle Guyton to chair the ad hoc committee and Ms. Jada Garris and Mr. Mike Anderson to serve on this committee. Are there any objections to those committee members? Hearing none, they are our committee members. All right. All right, moving on to 10.0, the superintendent's report. And I now turn it over to Dr. Little.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We are just going to go directly into our presentations because so much of the presentations are focused on what the work has been over the last month. And we're going to begin with Dr. Thomas Rivers and Mr. Van Bowers, who are going to talk about the instructional model shifts and where we are and about kind of a peek into that future, but how we've kind of made these last couple model shifts, and we wanted to present to you, especially in regards to our elementary schools, who had a number of recommendations associated with that, coming back from 4-day to 5-day. And as you know, that today was actually the first day that our elementary schools came back. I would call it 5 days face-to-face, but it's not exactly true that today is this is a 4-day week with the holiday off, or not holiday, but with the off day yesterday. But today it really begins their return to 5-day face-to-face. So Mr. Bowers, if you want to walk us through the elementary model shifts, and I know Dr. Rivers is going to then talk about high school and middle school.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Little. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for having us here tonight to brief you on this instructional model change. First of all, we'll start with our elementary school transition. And as Dr. Little said, that started today, actually. So this Friday will be the first Friday for all-day instruction for our elementary students. And I will tell you that our principals and our teachers are excited about that. You know, they're really doing well. They were ready to make this transition, and I touched base with several of them today, and things are going really well. So just to give you a little background on how we got to this point, we've been working on this for certainly well over a month. We wanted to make sure that we had a very deliberate, safe transition. So we started well over a month with a transition team, studying this. Dr. Little advised us to be ready when the time came, and so that's what we did. We assembled a team of over 25 teachers, assistant principals, and central services staff. And we began to think about what a 5-day return would entail. And so through this process, we certainly kept SLT up to date, Dr. Little along the way, and in the end, the team produced several recommendations that we'll go over now. So first of all, the team felt very strongly that we needed to go ahead and extend the school day. Our wish would have been to extend the school day back to our normal hours. However, with the secondary schools not being on the same schedule, we had transportation issues, and that just wasn't possible. So I'd like to thank Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Kurtz for working with us to at least extend our day for 20 more minutes. And that new time starting today was 7:40 to 2:10. The next recommendation was that we provide our teachers with a minimum of 40 minutes of planning time daily, because that really was a major concern, that we provide good planning time for our teachers. And we had a few related art schedules due to the COVID restrictions that were not giving that 40 minutes. And so we had to work through all that with our principals, and they just did a wonderful job making sure that we have a 40-minute period in place for planning. And that is, of course, a minimum. Some of them have 45. Also, we wanted to make sure that students had at least 30 minutes a day to move, play, and remove their mask. And again, this is a minimum. Our principals have done a really great job of making sure that kids have more time than that. They really have enjoyed having the 2 recesses that we've implemented during the COVID time, and many of them have kept that in place and feel that it's greatly beneficial to the students. On Fridays, we talked about giving teachers more autonomy in building their schedules because we have such varied needs at the elementary level. We have students in many different places in their educational journey, and so we wanted to remove the time requirements for core content on Fridays, so that our teachers, if they needed to spend more time in small group instruction and ELA, then they could do that. Or if they wanted to spend more time in math, they could do that. So all of our principals have worked with their teachers to really design a schedule on Friday that directly addresses the needs of all of the students, and also allows for time for the teachers to have planning and collaboration. Okay. I'd like to thank Mr. Salters and Matt Warren for providing an additional sprayer for disinfecting classes in a more timely manner. That was one issue that the principals brought to our attention, that some of the teachers were having to vacate their classes early in the afternoons in order to get the room sprayed, disinfected. And so having an additional sprayer at each school helps us to do that in a more timely manner. Also, the addition of another housekeeper as well has really helped us to do a better job with disinfecting the classrooms. Also, we advise the principals to construct schedules to allow teachers ample time for planning and other duties such as parent meetings. So they really focused on giving that related arts block, also working on not planning meetings and faculty meetings and things in the afternoon so that teachers can have good time in the afternoon to plan as well. We also recommended that principals have discretion over their lunch schedules. And the reason that is the case is because our buildings are so different. Our cafeterias are different sizes. It's just not a one size fits all for all elementary schools. So we have given our principals the flexibility to meet the needs of their students and their staff. So basically what that means is that for lunch, you have to maintain social distancing. So of course that means that you could not have a normal lunch schedule, but you could take one, maybe two classes and socially distance them in the cafeteria. And you could work out a schedule that rotates through the week so that kids have the opportunity to move throughout the building and have lunch in the cafeteria, because that's something that they really haven't had a chance to do this year. Now, I will tell you that many of the teachers and many of the principals have really liked eating in the classroom. They feel like that it saved a lot of time, cut down on transition, so some of the schools are deciding we're just going to continue to do that. So again, flexibility is the key here, and our principals have really done a good job doing what's right for their schools. Okay, moving over to the next page. We, in coordination with Dr. Little and Mr. Salters and actually all of SLT, we brought the recommendation to allow for some volunteers to come back in the building because our teachers were saying that, you know, since we stopped having volunteers in the building, that all of the administrative kind of things that volunteers would help out with, running papers and that sort of thing, they were doing all that themselves, plus having IEP meetings, plus planning for their instruction and planning for e-learning days. And it was really taking a toll, and they said if we could just have a few volunteers back, that would really help us. And so we came forth with that recommendation. We worked with HR as well to make sure that we do this safely. And so we are going to allow some volunteers to come back, work directly in the workroom. These are not volunteers that are going to go into the classroom and work with students. We're not ready to do that yet, but they can go in and do administrative kind of things in the workroom. Also, again, thanks to Matt Warren, Mr. Salters, we are getting more plexiglass. As a matter of fact, I think that's probably already happened to make sure that our related arts classes, those classes that have tables, that the plexiglass is in place so that we can do some more movement in terms of going to related arts. And then we wanted to make sure that principals had good notice, at least 2 weeks, to plan because it did require lots of scheduling changes, and of course we did accomplish that. We gave them a 2-week notice that this was going to happen. Finally, just to list our priorities here as we go through the rest of the year. Number one, of course, is student and staff safety. We're not going to sacrifice our safety measures, continuing with the family model as much as possible, continuing with social distancing, continue with masks during the day. So that is something that we're going to continue to focus on. Also, I want to give a big shout out to our school counselors because they have done a wonderful job addressing the social and emotional needs of our students and our families during this very difficult time. And at the elementary level, we see lots and lots of family issues that are brought into school, and our counselors have just done a wonderful job dealing with that, and all of our principals as well, making sure that we have time built into the day to address social and emotional needs of our students. Also, as I mentioned before, we're very focused on our core instruction, our reading, and our math. Our teachers are really doing a great job working in small groups to address some of the deficiencies that we're seeing. Flexibility, as I said before, is the name of the game. We have to stay flexible. We have to understand that all of our schools are not exactly the same. They're not the same size. They're not made up of the same people. We have issues that we have to be flexible on, and our principals have done a really good job with that. And finally, making sure that we maintain communication with our families. That's so important, but I am very proud of our principals for the communication that they put forth with our families and with the faculty through various means. Okay, I'll let Dr. Rivers go through the timeline and talk about secondary schools, and then I'll hang around so we'll take questions at the end.
Appreciate it. Kind of want to start with just giving you an overview of our timeline. And we're in March now, and believe it or not, the school year is getting close to the end. But we've done a lot in just a year, and thank goodness we feel like things are coming to an end with COVID-19 and the vaccine, and teachers getting the vaccine, but it's important to kind of just look back and recap some things with our timeline. So we started the school year in August and September in the hybrid model. Cohorts A and B of students, half our student population were going on Monday, Tuesday, and the other half on Wednesday, Thursday, with Friday being an e-learning day for those students who are face-to-face. Keep in mind, we still had a large group of our students in our Lula program for online program, but for face-to-face, we were in a hybrid model through September. And then on October 5th, we moved to a 4+1 learning model. And during this time period, we were always analyzing our data, looking at number of students that are being quarantined, also being mindful of trying to get our youngest learners back. So we were in constant communication with principals, central service individuals, talking with teachers and staff to make sure when should we move and when it's best, analyzing our quarantine data. So cohorts A and B for pre-K through second grade, October 5th, we moved them through to a 4+1 learning model. We also identify students who need the most support in grades 3 through 12. And so served in a self-contained classroom, those students with IEPs, as well as some of our English language learners in grades 3 through 12. And so that was our focus on October 5th. October 19th, we grabbed the next group of students in cohorts A and B, grades 3 through 5, and moved them also to the 4+1 learning model from the hybrid model. We then extended the priority groups to middle and high school. Again, looking and identify students who need the most support to get them back in school to as many days as possible. And so that was kind of a direction at the time, on October 19th. So we moved next to November 9th. Again, looking at what needs to happen next to get our youngest learners back in school. So cohorts A and B for grade 6 in middle school, brought them back to that 4+1 learning model. And then we extended priority groups to students in high school. Again, identify students who are struggling, who may be behind in some of their courses, as well as our seniors who need support to finish school. So principals and administrators worked hard to identify students in those priority groups. November 16th, we completed middle school at that time by looking at grades 7 and 8 and bringing back cohorts A and B to the 4+1 learning model. Keep in mind that one day is that e-learning day on Friday, asynchronous type instruction and support. Small group meetings are happening on Fridays. Teachers working with groups of students and sometimes inviting some students to school from Lula in the building also to support them. And then we continue to bring back additional priority groups in high school up until November 16th. So at that time, that brought us to Thanksgiving. And if we recall what's happening during that time period, Thanksgiving break, winter break, December through February, we decided to delay our transitions based on all the evidence that was in front of us with the increase in numbers in the community as far as COVID-19. There was a high community spread, so we paused during that time period from December through February. And then we started to analyze more of our data at that point and decided that it was a good time to make a transition to our high school students from March 1st, and that was roughly 2 weeks ago now, to bring them back to the 4+1 learning model. So that happened on March 1st for students in high school, bringing all those students back to the 4+1 learning model. And then on March 16th, this current week, today, we welcomed our elementary school students back to 5 days of school. That has always been our intent, to get students back as soon as we could, based on all the information that we have in front of us. So our elementary students are back in school for their 5 days of school. And we announced last week that we will be moving our middle school students to 5 days of school right after spring break. And we've been analyzing the quarantine numbers, and we did have a spike early February of about 200 middle school students being quarantined. That's now under 100. And so as those numbers go down, it gives us the evidence that we need to go forward to bring more students back to school for 5 days. And so we're hopeful that, given the trends that are happening in our community and nationwide, that things will remain that way even through spring break. But we will be ready to pivot if we have to. But right now, the plan is to bring middle school students back for 5 days the week we return from spring break. And then high school will be right after that. Again, we're going to look at numbers. We had 2 weeks of data with our high school students in the 4+1 learning model, and those numbers are also under 100. And many of those numbers are coming from students in athletics and outside events, activities that are happening. So that causes our students to have more quarantine and close contact numbers in high school compared to elementary and even middle school because of their ability to be more mobile as individuals, as young adults. So secondary considerations, things that we have discussed with our administrators in several meetings on what we need to do to get ready for increased days in middle school and high school. Principals will work hard to construct schedules so that teachers have as much planning time and collaborative time in their rooms as possible. And so when we lose those e-learning Fridays, right now they've been dedicated to having some IEP meetings, collaborative planning with teachers, professional learning activities that are happening in the school. So we want to take some of those things off their plate so they can still have time to provide the instruction that's necessary when they lose those Fridays. Principals will also try to consider a schedule, and Mr. Bowers kind of mentioned this, to allow small groups of students use the cafeteria or eat outside the classroom for lunch. Right now, all students are having lunch in the classrooms, and that's been our safety measures to mitigate any kind of spread. But hopefully, slowly, we can bring a few students to the cafeteria if we're able. It'll be kind of a school decision. Not every school can do it because they're much larger, such as a high school. But some of our middle schools could bring smaller groups to the students to the cafeteria and keep them socially distanced. But right now, the classrooms are working, and we may still stay in that place. As I mentioned earlier, schools will offer asynchronous professional learning opportunities for teachers instead of encumbering their time on Fridays or throughout the school day, because they need that time to kind of plan to take care of any students who are being quarantined, as well as work with some students who are in our online academy. Teachers will support the quarantined students by allowing them to Zoom in class when possible, and also by creating virtual lessons for them. So we have cases where students have been in close contact, they're out for 14 days, and so we want to support them as best we can, and that's what those Fridays were being used for. And when we don't have those, we got to find those opportunities so they can support those students. Central Services will provide schools with additional sprayers. We kind of mentioned that earlier. And then we also will bring in more plexiglass to our schools to support any kind of things that we need in classrooms to mitigate the spread. And so all those things are considerations that we have in place for secondary schools as well as elementary. And that concludes the presentation on reentry and the shifts that we're making right now in elementary and middle and high school. And Mr. Bowers and I, we're available for any questions you may have.
I wanted to add one quick thing just about the quarantine numbers. So we are tracking quarantine numbers over the next couple of weeks to see an entire pattern of what quarantine is happening. Before we make any high school decisions, we want to make sure that we're not it's not triggering large amounts of quarantining, because then that becomes more problematic when you take away time that you would support students in the quarantine model. So that's what we're really tracking this week and into next week.
That's correct. I guess I would like to say thank you, because it looked like we had about 8 different school models there over the 2020-21 calendar year. And I know just trying to plan vacations in my little world of a family of 5, every time you have to change your vacation because of something, it's a bunch of work. So y'all have packed in 8 school years into 1 year with planning. So again, I want to thank you all for your work.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great way to put it.
Board, any other questions for Dr. Rivers or Mr. Bowers?
It felt like the first day of school at elementary. I was dropping my daughter off this morning at Midway and saw all the cars lined up. It felt like the first day of school again with the traffic that was out there at elementary school. So we're looking forward to doing the same thing in middle school and high school as soon as we can.
Yeah, I think the traffic patterns have been different every couple weeks all year. It's gone from really not bad traffic to, oh, this is more like normal.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much. And now, and as an extension of that, because as you know, what has really the shift has come over the last couple weeks is that of the opening of 1B and what impact that has on us. And we also wanted to talk about the quarantining, because that is one of our big issues. And so I'd like to introduce Amy Wood, our Director of Nursing and Health Services, and she is going to walk us through a bit of the COVID vaccination information, as well as some of our quarantines. Issues around quarantine, I guess, is what we're doing.
So as you may know, we began discussing staff vaccinations and how we were going to handle that way back in November. And if I do say so myself, we developed a very nice vaccination plan. Unfortunately, when we found out on March 2nd that Phase 1B was going to be opening on March 8th, and we were going to be welcoming about 5 times as many people into 1B as what we originally assumed, we kind of had to change our plan. And luckily, we had enough of the foundation and groundwork for a vaccination clinic that we could pivot pretty easily and decide to do something different. Originally, we were going to vaccinate about 3,500 staff members from Lexington 1, Lexington 3, and Lexington 4 over 7 different sites in our district over the course of 2 days. That would have taken some time, according to the new Phase 1B, and so we opted to try and get as much information and as many different options and opportunities in front of those staff members as possible so that they could get the vaccine that they chose when they chose it as quickly as they wanted it. And so we started by giving them information. If you don't know, March 8th is when Phase 1B officially opened, but Daytona Raceway, I believe it was McLeod Hospital System, they partnered with them so that on the Friday before, on March 5th, they were able to include 1B in that large drive-through kind of vaccination site. And so we got the information out to our staff so that if they wanted to, they could participate in that. We uploaded everyone that said they wanted to participate in the vaccinations. We uploaded them through Lexington Medical Center into the Vaccine Administration Management System, which is kind of a big step because that's how DHEC and CDC want those vaccines to be recorded, those vaccine administrations to be recorded. And just getting into that system is kind of a hurdle for a lot of people. So we uploaded everyone who said they were interested in receiving the vaccine from our district, from Lexington 3 and Lexington 4 into the VAM system so that they could go ahead and register. And if they chose, seek their own vaccination. Some people wanted Pfizer, some wanted Moderna, some wanted Johnson & Johnson, some wanted to have it done closer to their home, not here in Lexington 1. And then we also planned our on-site clinic at White Knoll High School that occurred last Friday. Our school nurses were the ones administering that. We did almost 650 staff members from Lexington 1, Lexington 3, and Lexington 4. And we are looking to do that again on April 2nd for the second round, because that will be our 21 days where we'll do our second dose of the Pfizer vaccine for those folks. And then as we move forward, we'll continue the discussion because either summer, fall, winter, somewhere around there, more vaccines I'm sure will be available for our students. And so we'll have to start discussing what, how to facilitate that, for our students. Any questions about the vaccination plan that we have, and are continuing to develop? Okay. And then our quarantine practices. So nothing has really changed as far as how we are quarantining people and who we determine meets the definition of a close contact. In December, we sent out an email to all of our parents to let them know that the CDC and DHEC were allowing for folks to potentially end quarantine early, and we were going to allow that in our district. We, at that time, mentioned in the email that it would be up to the school, that the school would have discretion in who was able to return, because there is certain criteria that has to be met. And so one of the things I think that has been confusing for especially our high school parents is while they were in hybrid mode, it was almost unheard of for a school to deny an early end to quarantine for those students because they could maintain all of the social distancing, they could make sure that they were masked, they could make sure that everybody else Should someone unfortunately still go on to develop symptoms during that 14-day period and test positive, they would not interfere with any other student's ability to attend school. Once we came out of the hybrid model, those high school parents who had previously been able to have an early into quarantine found that may not have been possible with all of the students in the class. So our district practices for an early into quarantine are still the same. As long as you meet the criteria that DHEC has set up, your school will then determine whether or not those additional things that have to be met while you're in the classroom can be maintained. And so schools are different. What might work in a third grade class at Rocky Creek Elementary may not work in a third grade class at Lexington Elementary. And so that's why we leave it up to the school to determine what can be accommodated in their classrooms and in their school. Any questions?
I guess another big thank you. The profession of nursing is a great one because there's so many different career options for a nurse, and they meet so many different needs. But I would presume most people that choose school-based nursing they signed up to administer to the children at their school. And here y'all have been now administering to not just the children, but their parents and the adults in your school. So things like contact tracing, mass vaccinations, that probably was not what makes a school nurse sign up to be a school nurse. So just like all of us, y'all have been asked to do work that you probably wouldn't pick to do. But I have not heard any issues around school nurses. I've not heard a single one complain, and just thank you.
Thank you. I will say that lots of our nurses, so we went through 30 different nurses. We had them come in 2 different shifts on Friday to administer the vaccines. And quite a few of them actually said that they were so excited to be able to do something other than contact tracing and making those follow-up calls that it felt like Christmas and they couldn't really sleep the night before. And so it really did invigorate them and give them just kind of that lift that they needed to I think make it through the rest of the year.
Dr. Little, you may recall, very early into this process, I had asked you where we stop and DHEC begins. And I think, one thing that is maybe kind of muddied in the community is the understanding that DHEC is the ultimate end-all be-all when it comes to a global pandemic and the quarantine guidelines and those kind of things. So we really, as a board, we have no power to overrule any of those recommendations. It's considered a public health crisis, and therefore they become the heir apparent, if you will, for that decision making. And of course, we've seen a ton of changes that have occurred throughout time, and it is difficult to maneuver, not only within schools, within community, offices and those kind of things. It is a challenge. And so it can be very conflicting for parents, I think, they're not going to pull the school and child care recommendations off of DHEC's website to understand that, we have set up in our classrooms plexiglass for a 3-foot physical distance because that allows us to cut virtually in half our quarantine numbers, but bring back more students. That does not hold true during a close contact. So if you're a close contact, you come out of quarantine after day 7 and a negative test, you cannot physically distance at 3 feet with plexiglass. You have to socially distance at 6 feet. And obviously, I think what you're getting at, to accomplish that in the confines of just the logistical setup of a room, it's going to change from school to school to school. And so that's just some of the nuanced things that we have seen in the community. One thing I would offer up is on the actual form for the school that says, SARS-CoV-2 testing did occur and, student tested negative, they may return on blank. As a community provider, I'm obligated to put hey, you can return to the community at day 8, but does not mean that you can return to your school on day 8. And I think that may be a little bit of rub for parents to say, okay, it almost becomes confrontational at that point, where it's like, well, my doctor says I can go back on day 8, but you're telling me I can't come back till day 14. And both are actually true. That's the hard part to understand. Yes, on day 8, you can go back into the community per DHEC, given certain guidelines, that you're asymptomatic, that you wear a mask, that you socially distance at all times. But the same cannot necessarily hold true for schools. And so one recommendation would be just to eliminate the date for the return and eliminate that from the form. So that may help to just say, okay, you've tested negative here, you can return to community activity, given these guidelines. You need to talk with your school nurse to understand when you can actually return to school. And that may help some of the confusion, if you will, that exists within the community, and almost some of the confrontation that could occur.
Thank you.
For the next pandemic.
All right. Thank you very much, Nurse Wood. We appreciate it. And as a parent of a child who plans on going into nursing, I'm glad to know there are lots of job opportunities for those individuals. That'll maybe get her off my payroll sooner rather than later. That is very exciting news. And so for our final part of our superintendent report tonight, we do have an operations update from Mr. Salters. And so we'd like to go through the progress that we've been making over the last month.
And thank you, Dr. Little. Members of the board, I'll start this evening with the now named Lakeside Middle School. And you can see we're making significant progress with the site. We have our 3 classroom wings up here, our front office is here with the roof on it, cafeteria is here with the roof on it. We have our main entrance for the service drive, the bus loop, which will actually come into the back of the site and loop around. That is completed. We haven't made the connection to Old Cherokee Road yet. That'll probably happen down the road here for a little while. Actually, as of today, this road is actually has the binder paving course down, so it is really in good shape. And what's going to happen is we're going to move traffic over to this side. This has been the primary access point to the construction. It's going to move to this side now and will allow for the other underground storage system for stormwater to be built here, and then this drive to be constructed, which is the main parent drop-off. This is an aerial photo of the site. You can see this is the auditorium area. This is where the seating actually will be. So this is the stage itself. And the associated rooms that surround that, the band, course rooms, dance room, and so forth. But you see the roofing has really made good progress. We have the white cap sheet, so that's final roofing on these areas. And then these areas here will be added, that cap sheet coming next. There's a closer shot of that auditorium area there. And then you're now looking you're over the school looking back out to Old Cherokee Road, which is out here. And this is where the athletic playfield will be on the campus. Again, the main parent drive will be on this side, and this is the main service drive here. We're continuing to work with SCDOT for permitting of the Old Cherokee Road improvements. That is an ongoing process right now. They have started a safety project down at the end of Old Cherokee, kind of off the screen this way, towards the little par 3 golf course. The federal highway, I think that was a federal highway safety improvement, and that's being done to line up Catawba Trail and Old Cherokee and move that red light. So that work has started, and we'll ultimately end up tying into that in the future. Here's just a few closer shots of some of the construction. This is up on the roof. And a lower shot of this was a concrete pour day. You see the wet concrete there over by the, that would be the stage area. And we have brick on most of the building. And then this is the cement board product. It's called Nichi High that will be finished out on this area. These are the science classrooms that are on the ends of the building. Here you're looking at the cafeteria over in this area, in the kitchen area here. And this is the library looking out over what will be a courtyard eventually. And this is kind of the main stairwell that is out in front of the cafeteria. And then you're on the main level in the A classroom wing looking out, on the second floor level, looking out towards the library and that main stairwell in the commons area there. And a shot from the second floor looking down into the cafeteria. Moving on to White Knoll High School, major project here, the 32 classroom addition is really doing well. We've got our, the building is basically dried in now. We've got our permanent roofing on, windows in place. And we're beginning to work on some interior finishes here. Spent a lot of time out there Friday with the vaccine clinic, and you look at that building and it looks like it's always been there. I mean, it really has turned out very nicely. Great addition to the campus. This is an interior shot. It's a lot going on here, but there's a main stairwell kind of in the middle of this addition, and this was a kind of an area where students will be able to have kind of a ad hoc classroom setting as well. And you're actually upstairs now, kind of looking down over that stairwell area. And just another shot of that same space. Interior classroom now, so you've got some wall finishes are on, you got some lights in, and we're getting ready for an overhead inspection there. And then we'll be able to drop the ceiling grid in. This is the Performing Arts Center, and so this is the main fly loft area. It's about a 60-foot wall there, which allows for the set design stuff to go up. Yes, sir.
It looks like the Big Mo in Monetta drive-in movie theater.
It would make a great drive-in wall right now. It really would. Eventually, that'll be closed in. Our big performing arts centers all have this fly loft capability to drop sets in and out quickly. This is the seating area. The main stage is here, obviously. So they're kind of working their way out of the building, but it's really taking shape nicely. And there's some, black box theater and some other classrooms that are in the interior repurposed stage area. There's a closer shot of that main stage opening from the ground level. There's a few more shots. And now I'm excited finally to bring you some shots at Gilbert High School. Not a whole lot going on there yet, but we've broken ground. We're preparing the slab, and as you recall, we're doing a performing arts center here at Gilbert High School as well, and that'll kind of round out the performing arts centers at our high schools. And real excited about getting this project underway. It will be off the end of this building. The gymnasium is here. The main student parking lot is out here, so it'll be off the end of the building here as soon as that pad is prepared. And just, that's the softball field there, and you have a little hill that you go up to get to the athletic area. So kind of closes out the campus right off the end of that building. Also be a weight room and a wrestling room addition on that facility as well. And that's the building plan that update we have tonight. Obviously, you can check our progress on the website with the different pictures and things that we have out there to keep track of all the various projects going on.
And then has DOT given us an estimated completion date in front of Lexington Middle School, or they won't commit to that yet?
No, sir. We haven't gotten that far with them.
Okay.
We submitted plans. They do, provide comments on the plans, and we submit back. And they have. So we've been going back and forth with comments, and so we just received some comments back. We'll turn those around in a week or two, and then they'll, it'll probably take another month or so at least before we have final permitted plans, and then we'll, bid those. And the construction is going to take it's going to be a pretty good project. So, I would anticipate, maybe 5-6 month duration. There's a lot of utilities that have to be relocated and so forth. So it's pretty involved.
Dr. Little, is that
Yes,
it for
ma'am.
you?
That concludes the superintendent portion of the agenda.
All right, thank you very much. All right, moving on to 11.0, new business. And I'm let Mr. Salters take a drink of water, and then he can lead us in our budget planning priority setting time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one might take a few minutes, so I want to make sure I'm ready for it. I appreciate the opportunity this evening to talk with you about general fund operating budget. It is that time of year again. And so what we're doing this evening is really twofold. One, I want to talk with you about kind of where we are at this point with this year's budget and what we know, and then also talk a little bit about our priorities that we're recommending that you consider for the upcoming budget year as we go into the budget development process for 21, 22. So just a reminder, in this year, these were our priorities to restructure Gilbert Elementary and Gilbert Primary, which we did. Relocated Peoria Middle School. Happy that opened in January. Excited to see how well it's doing out there now. We did open the College Center at Gilbert High School. Really excited about how that's really taken off. I think there's a lot of energy around that program Mr. Baskett's brought to that. And of course, we've continued to prepare for COVID impact and unknowns. As we were standing out there on Friday dealing with a vaccine clinic, no one would have ever thought that would be something in our purview, but here we are. So we'll continue to work through that. Looking at the status of the current budget year, we're continuing to monitor the economy and the actions of the General Assembly, during our budget. The base student cost at the 45th day was $24.89, and that hasn't changed at this point. And I'll say, kind of in general, we're seeing some of our local revenue actually tick up a little bit from our projections, and some of the state revenues staying about the same. We haven't seen any kind of significant slides yet in the state stuff, so we've been pretty fortunate with that. You will need to take up a budget amendment, and we'll talk about that some more in a few minutes. But the legislature has passed a step increase for teachers, and that's been taken to the governor, and so we'll have to address that as part of this budget. I just remind you that the 2020-2021 budget was about $8 million less than the 1920 budget. And that sounds really exciting because it sounds like we saved a bunch of money, went through and cut a lot, but just remember that we did not have a step increase in this budget originally. So that's a big chunk of that money. And so as part of the original budget, we had about $3.7 million of fund balance that we had approved to use to balance the budget. The board approved in December one-time payments for employees. That was about a $6.7 million increase in the overall budget in salaries and related costs. And then, obviously, we've talked about this, the General Assembly is on track to pass some legislation. I really appreciate our staff and the relationships that we have with our state legislature. Dr. Little's involvement in that process really helped shape some of the legislation based on feedback from our staff, and how we really should pay this step increase. It sounds really, really trivial to just give everybody a lump sum at one time, but it's a really complicated process, and we got some key language added to the legislation that allowed us to pay a lump sum in arrears for all of the money that they're due up until the time we pay it, and then our payroll system will automatically adjust their step going forward for the rest of the term. So really fortunate that that was added into the legislation because it saved a ton of time for our payroll staff, and it'll make it easier for our employees as well. And so what we're looking to do is April 13th, it's your regular meeting. We would bring a budget amendment proposal to the board at that time. Should you pass that amendment, it would allow time for our payroll staff to process those lump sum payments and start the rest of the step increase on our April 26th payroll. So we're hopeful that timeline and schedule will work out going forward. Taking a look at the budgets, just to kind of remind you of what we're talking about when we talk about our budgets. In FY20, we had a $295 million total budget. And then in 21, we had the 287, and that just shows that $8 million decrease. And you can see we worked really hard in programs and services. It cut out about $1 million of that. And then salaries and related costs, that the bulk of that is the step increase that did not occur. And then as a reminder, you see this chart a lot in our budget processes, readings and so forth, but the bulk of our funding is used for our most valuable resource, and that is our teachers and staff. You would expect that's what we do, is educate students, and our resources are those teachers and staff that help do that. So 87.73% of that budget is related to those endeavors, and then we have two other small pieces that support that mission as well. Take a minute to remind you about the operating surplus that we had at the end of 1920. If you recall, we ended the fiscal year with about an $8.3 million surplus, and so we could have moved that money into our fund balance. I mean, ultimately, that's where it goes. But we used a portion of that $8.3 million to pay that one-time bonus for our employees. And so that was the $6.6 million in December. The cost of the step for certified staff is approximately $2.4 million. And it's important, the legislation also says that the staff have to be employed March 1st. So it's not for staff who've left prior to March 1st. They have to be employed March 1st. And so the cost of the proposed step for all other staff is about $1.1 million. Historically in this district, boards have always done the same for all. So if the state gives a teacher step, then all staff would receive a step. So we're showing those costs there. We estimate that the state will provide reimbursement for the certified staff at about $1.5 million. And you say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. We have $2.4 million worth of cost. The reason for that is because we pay higher than the state minimum salary schedule. And the state is going to reimburse us based on the state minimum salary schedule. So there is a requirement for us to make up that local gap to support our teachers. And we're proud of that because it helps in recruiting efforts and retention efforts for staff. So it's a problem, a good problem to have, that we pay more than that state minimum. So the net cost of the step is about $2 million. What I'm showing here is that if you use the balance of that surplus, you have about roughly $300,000 that would remain unfunded out of that surplus. And so there's a lot going on the next few slides. So just take a minute to walk through the left-hand column here is the actual budget, revenue and expenditures, and so forth for FY20. And then we have our fund balance at the end of that, that column there. And so that's where you see the $8,391,000 surplus at the end of that year. And so the original approved budget at the beginning of this year was this 274 revenue, 285, and then we had our transfers in, and then we this is where we show that operational balance or fund balance. We would use about 3.6 million, and so when you kind of follow all that through, if you didn't spend the surplus, it would roll in, and you would end up with a $65.9 million fund balance. And of course, we did spend a portion of that, and that's what the next column is. And this shows the amended budget that you passed in December, and that shows the use of that 6.6 million plus the existing 3.6 that was there. And so that takes your fund balance here. The last column is the potential amended budget should you move forward with the step for all employees. It shows the additional revenue that comes in and the additional associated expenditures. And this is where your fund balance would end up. A note on the slide here, going back over, originally in the 1920 budget, you had approved a budget that anticipated using $8.2 million of fund balance. And so you didn't use, we didn't use that throughout the course of that year, and we actually had an $8.3 million surplus, so that was, like a $16 million swing to the good. And so in FY21, we started looking at some other practices and ways that we could tighten those numbers up going forward, and so that's where you see a smaller use of that number there. Again, if you move forward with the full step for everyone, this is where you would end up potentially going forward. Talk a little bit about millage. This is really important in the conversation because as you start thinking about budget priorities, you have very limited sources of revenue and opportunities to generate additional revenue to pay for those budget priorities. And so, the Code of Laws that defines the millage rate increase, and basically it's the CPI from the preceding year, plus this population growth factor. That population growth factor is provided to us from Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. We haven't gotten that number yet, so we took a little liberty and just did a 3-year average just so we could have some conversation about what 2021-22 could look like. And so these are exact numbers, and these are based on this average, okay? So you have a millage rate increase limitation, so you can go up 4.49% of your operating millage that was levied. And so that's how you get this 14.27 mils. And again, the same thing here. Now, in 2020, 2021, it was a reassessment year. And so we had rollback millage. And so that's what's reflected here. That's why our millage rate went down. I think it's 13.45 or 46%, something like that. Our points, I'm sorry, it's on the next slide. But anyway, that, or 5.4, excuse me, that is reflected here. And so your millage levy is based on this new rate amount. And then we just estimated this line. So you're looking at potentially this year, assuming that population factor is similar, at around 11%. 11 mils potential increase. And so when you look at this, you also have the ability to do what's called using look-back millage. And you can look back 3 years and apply mills that were not levied previously. So the last time we raised millage was in the 18-19 fiscal year. We raised 4.45 mils, which generated about $1.2 million. And we did that for Project Hope and school resource officers. Everything was related to safety and security enhancements in our schools at that time. Because we levied that 4.45, that left 9.82 mills available that we potentially could look back and levy. And so if you go back these 3 years, you end up having 37.85, which is the total of this, look-back mills that you could levy in this fiscal year. If you add that 37.85 to the 11, you end up with 48.85 mills that you potentially could levy. We're not going to bring you a budget that's going to recommend you levying 48.85 mills. At least I'm not. But that is an option, and we just wanted to show you what that looks like. And I want to remind you as well, when you levy those mills, because of Act 388, you're levying those mills on 6% assessment and vehicles and manufacturing. You're not levying that on homeowners. Homeowners pay zero property tax for school operations. Okay, so that burden falls all on business when you're levying those mills. So assuming that our average is about right for CPI, and you can raise about 11 mills. A mill is worth, now with reassessment, $309,245. It would generate about $3.4 million if you went up that maximum for this year. That would cost about $66 per $100,000 of assessed value. So if you owned a business in the district that was worth $100,000, you'd pay $66 more in tax. You can follow how that calculation goes. And we just show you some random spots as to the cost impact and then the incremental increase in revenue and the overall revenue that would potentially be generated by doing that to potentially balance the budget. Want to take a quick look at membership. We look at average daily membership for our attendance calculations. This is the first year in I don't know how long, over 20 years, that we have not grown around 450 to 500 students or more. We projected, I think it's 535 growth in this year, and actually we had we actually lost 161 students compared to our average daily membership at the end of last year. So our enrollment actually has gone down slightly. And I don't recall that happening in the district, but we're obviously in a unique time. We feel like we've had students pull out for different opportunities, different service models. We probably had some, kindergarten students who stayed in, their programs that were private programs and so forth. So we anticipate seeing a fair return of students next year on top of our normal growth. Now, our normal growth is kind of an interesting dilemma right now because we usually have building going on like crazy in our school system, which we do. However, if you go try to buy a home right now in our school system, you can't find one. And if you find one, you better buy it today because it's going to be sold tomorrow. And many of the neighborhoods that are under construction right now have waiting lists, and they've stopped taking names for building because there's so much demand. So we have a real supply issue of housing, which is a very unique situation. So we anticipate, recovering by about 515 students, but we're not really sure what that's going to look like going forward because it's very possible that constriction of demand of our supply may have an impact on that. But we do feel like a lot of folks who live here now that have gone and made other decisions will come back to our school district next year.
Mr. I don't know if my neighborhood is any indication, but we've had probably 4 or 5 houses new families have moved in since Christmas, and they all have 5-year-olds and 2-year-olds. So I feel like there's this young, I think that we're going to have an elementary school boom just based on what I'm seeing in my, and 3 of those 5 houses sold before they ever went on the market.
Right.
And I think we're going to probably be 700, 800, 900 is my prediction. I think a lot of these kids that went to private schools and charter schools and home schools are going to come back.
Right. And and I would agree with you. And we are taking the I guess the prudent budget approach and trying to look at that number at 515, because if you budget at 7 something, you staff at 7 something, you project revenue at 7 something, and then you don't have that, then you're digging in your pockets to cover it. So.
Mr. Salters, let me ask you too on the decrease this year, 161. Are those actual withdrawals, or are they unaccounted students as well, or do you know?
It's withdrawals.
Withdrawals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So all that being said, I want to that's kind of a set to where we are and what we want to talk about this evening. And so, when we think about budget priorities for our process, we really are thinking about these 50,000-foot view priorities. What areas do we want to look at? And then within those areas, you'll have initiatives that support the overall priority to guide you and get deeper into things. So, we've met with our school principals. SLT has met and had a lot of discussion and conversations. We did a session with our school principals and had some feedback from them as well. And so what I'm going to show you is kind of a jumping off point for you, the board, to have some conversation. But we feel it's important that we maintain our and/or reduce our student-teacher ratios. We're concerned that if we go in, I'll just say kind of at a max ratio or a higher level ratio, and then we start having students come in that we weren't planning for, we're going to really be in trouble with high class size. So we feel it's really important to try to maintain and/or reduce ratios where possible to prep for those students coming in. And that's really twofold. One is so that we have room in those classes, but more importantly, so that we have qualified teachers in front of those students to teach. I know Mr. Stacy will tell you it's not an easy thing to hire a teacher, and they're in demand. And so we want to make sure we got really good ones. We want to keep them, and so that's what we're working towards.
Well, and I would also say, fifth grade teachers inherit the sins of the fourth grade teachers, and the fourth grade teachers inherit the sins of third. So I think this next year, 21, 22, everyone will inherit the sins of COVID, meaning those teachers are going to have more work to do than their traditional year. So giving them smaller sizes, I would definitely support.
Yeah. And that's what we're working towards. Additionally, we feel it's important to continue our step increase for our staff. That sort of goes into this next one, but we want to continue to identify and implement employee retention recruitment strategies. There are a number of strategies out there in the industry right now, and our teachers, they really, years ago it was an employer's market. Now it's an employee's market. Our teachers are really, obviously very marketable and have a really marketable skill. And so we want to make sure we can put things in place that help them feel supported and help them feel valued in our system. And so that's what that strategy is looking at doing. And then additionally, we have some other strategies. Obviously, we're planning for the relocation of the LMS facility. We're going to be preparing for and our instructional services folks have talked about this with you before, but we're preparing for the Gilbert Early Childhood Center that would be opening in August of next year. Providing ongoing support for our Lula program. Last count, I heard it was over 700 or so students in the Lula program, so that's really a school worth of students in our middle and high school level students. So we need to provide ongoing support there. Again, continuing to expand the college center at Gilbert High School. And then, once again, we need to continue to prepare for the ongoing COVID impact and the unknowns associated with that. And we hopefully those unknowns will decrease as we go. But that's really what we're focused, we think we need to focus on as we go forward. So those are the priorities that we are kind of putting out there on the table for you guys to react to and talk around. And of course, you may have others that you want to look at. And so, with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you to have some discussion. And I'm happy to reference any slide if you guys want me to go back and look at stuff as we talk.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Salters. All right, Board, this is our opportunity to discuss budget priorities that you may have in mind or things that have come to you over the last few months. Share those and kind of provide Mr. Salters and his staff some homework as we head into preparing the first draft of the budget.
So I'm guessing you're going to present to us what you propose as the teacher-student ratios and right.
Yeah, so we will build a budget based on decreased student-teacher ratios. I don't know, Mr. Stacy, you want to talk about that a little bit? And at that.
So where we are right now, if you remember last year, we staffed K2 22 to 1. We did third grade 23 to 1, and then fourth and fifth grade, we started at 25 to 1. When we got to actual where the rubber met the road, and we were trying to make sure we had a budget, and we were all working from home at the time, and we were trying to think about revenue coming in, and we're not real clear, like everything had shut down, so we were worried about sales tax. All of that is part of our revenue. So we really tried to be extremely frugal last year. And so we actually bumped those ratios up a little bit going forward. At the high school, we had, like if you were over 2,000 students, your divisor was 18, and then it worked down that list. Every 100 students, it went down to 0.25. Well, we bumped at 0.25 to try to make it so we could save positions. What we'd like to do is go back to where we were at the beginning of last year and actually reduce it one more. The only place we reduced middle school down to 24 to 1, and we kept it there. Because middle school, when we started looking at numbers across the board, I think y'all even recognize middle school was pretty tight. And even at 24 to 1, it's pretty tight. So what we'd like to do is start this year at least at 23 to 1. Do K2 21 to 1, and do 3-5 23 to 1. And what I'm going to argue is that what Dr. Powers just alluded to, there's a loss of instruction, obviously, this year due to the pandemic. And I think if we could reduce class size for teachers, that would be a huge strategy in addressing some of those loss of instruction. And so if there's any way we can make that happen, and maybe even if we could go even lower, but looking at it the way I just described it, 21 to 1, 23 to 1, 23 to 1 in middle school, and then using the numbers we have in high school, we're looking at about 58 new FTE, and that's going to cost us a considerable amount of money. And but again, if we could grab hold of, talking today, if we could grab hold of some of this money from the federal government that's coming down, I read yesterday or heard on the news, it's in the billions that South Carolina will receive. If we could make that happen towards FTE, it would really help us. And the beauty of doing it now in the early parts of the budget is our principals could go ahead and start to hire for those lower ratios. And if you remember a few years back, maybe 2-3 years back, we had a pool of 30 FTE. And we allowed them to add FTE as numbers came in August, special ed in September. So the problem we're running into now is we couldn't find the teachers this past August. And so if we wait that long to add FTE, it's going to be problematic. But if we could go ahead and tell our principals tomorrow, I'm hopefully, as soon as possible, if we could go ahead and tell them what the numbers look like with these reduced ratios, they could go ahead and start hiring them, and we would already be kind of staffing our pool that we've done in the past. And I think it would go a long way into getting qualified teachers into those classrooms. So I don't like maintain up there. I really like reduce student-teacher ratios, and I do think it's possible, but I think we've got to get on it quick. I don't think we can wait till May and say, okay, we're going to do this. Then we're going to be struggling because contracts go out May 10th, and we aren't able to attract people into our district at that point. So I may have said way too much, but I want to emphasize that.
Thank you, Mike. It's dangerous to give Mike the microphone.
It is. I like to
I
talk.
love it. I love every minute of it.
Yeah, but it's really good conversation, and Mike's been very passionate about it, and I appreciate all the efforts HR has had working with our payroll staff to come up with some numbers. And just for perspective, so you say, hey, let's go ahead and make it 3. Let's cut it 3 more positions or students per classroom. Doing that 58 teachers is about $4.2 million. So if you want to do another one and you double that staff load, I'm not sure we could find them, but if you could, that's $8.4 million. And then I would just take you back to this slide. You're looking at, just for perspective, you're not going to find that much money sitting in the existing budget or big windfalls of revenue that can sustain positions long-term in the budget. So you really have to think about what, that whole conversation. And that's why I kind of gave you this reality check in the beginning so that hey, I'd love to sit here and say we'd like to have 15-1. I mean, that would be awesome. But number one, we couldn't afford to pay for the teachers, but number two, we don't have anywhere to put them. Because that's the second part of the conversation is do we have classroom spaces? And I know Mike and his team, as we've looked at the 58 teachers, that's kind of my party line. It's all right, well, do we have a classroom? And they've done the really good legwork to identify that already and know that we can accommodate that through creative ways that our principals come up with to find spaces for those kids. So.
Mr. Stacy, thank you for those numbers. As y'all know, I'm a former teacher in our district and an educator, so I really appreciate those class sizes, and I know the teachers in our district really do too. But my question is, so like when we're talking about equity between our schools and stuff, there are some schools that are close to these numbers, and then there are some of our schools that have much higher numbers. Will we look to move people around so that we can make our numbers more equitable so that all our kids get good teacher-student ratios?
Well, we start out with whatever the ratio might be, that's where we start. And then what happens typically is that some schools attract a lot more new students. Mm-hmm. And as they attract more new students, then we try to add another FTE. That's where the pool comes in. But this past year was just a real, and hopefully it was just an anomaly. It won't happen again. But this past year, it was really hard to find people in August. And so I don't want to wait till August. That's why I'm passionate about, let's go ahead and fill them now. If I fill a school, I mean, we do look at numbers, and let's say we have school A has 5 first grade teachers, and their ratio is at 15-1, and school B has 5 first grade teachers, and their ratio is at 22-1 because they've had an influx of new students, then we would consider taking a teacher from school A and shifting them to school B. We don't like to do that because people get really attached to their schools, but it's a reality.
Right.
And we try to do it before school starts, even before pre-planning, if at all possible. So we're constantly communicating with principals throughout the summer to, and they let us know, trust me, if their numbers get above whatever our ratio is going to be, those principals are calling us and letting us know they're approaching it, and so we start having some conversations. But, and typically where the real issue is kindergarten, because sometimes parents don't register kindergartners right away, and so we have to be real careful about moving a kindergarten teacher too soon. But I think if we started out with these lower ratios, and then just let everyone know that, ideally it's 22-1, not 21-1, but if we start with 21-1, when they get to 22, they might even, approach 23. That's not really crazy kind of talk.
Right.
But when it gets above that, then maybe, and so I just, I plead to you tonight to try to work towards that number one priority up there is reducing student-teacher ratios.
Can I jump, mind just real quick? And this has been kind of a priority of mine for several years, because I know that the student-teacher ratio is a function of two numbers: certified staff in the building and students in the building. And depending on how much, like, for example, at the high school level, you might have a lot more certified staff that is not actually face-to-face with students. And so that messes with the numbers a little bit.
That's one of the divisor, like for a high school of 2,000, the divisor is 18. So you're saying 18-1, but the reality is there's not 18 kids sitting in every class.
Right,
I mean, if you've got kids that are in high school, you know that you've got high school English classes that have 30 in them or 28. And so the lower we can get that divisor, the better. And we try to give our principals as much flexibility as possible, because they're going to look at, do they need an instructional coach, or there's some things that they might need outside of a classroom teacher. And, so it is kind of misleading sometimes when you say, well, like even middle school, the number's 23-1. Well, it's not really going to be 23 in every class. That 23-1 helps us get those numbers up so that we can have reduced numbers in the classroom.
Right, and that's kind of what I was getting to, is that, we hear 18-1, and then partially a function of there are only so many math teachers. And so you look at our high school math classes, and the math classes, except for the very higher level ones, they'll have 30 in every section.
You would want to stop. I mean, if the world everything was fair, you'd want to have your more advanced classes, maybe have a few more kids than your kids that are at need with, remediation, et cetera. But if you only have one AP chemistry class and only 15 kids sign up for it, are you not going to have that AP chemistry class for those 15 kids? You're going to have that AP class for those 15 kids.
But I'd also like to argue that, and I mean, this is a debate for another time, but those higher level classes, the burden on the teacher is greater, because the grading and the interaction with the product that the students, so maybe they should have smaller classes.
So my principals,
you can argue both sides of
my
it.
principals would say the same thing to you. Just give them more teachers, and they'll make sure that doesn't happen.
And going back to your question about different ratios, one thing that can happen that can skew ratios significantly is if you have a small number of classes, like 4 or 5 classes at first grade, and you end up getting right to the top of that ratio, just right over the ratios, and we go back in and add a teacher, it can, I don't want to say artificially, but it can deflate everyone's ratio well below where it should be, because you added that extra teacher, while everybody was just over that threshold. And that's what we have conversations all the time. It's got to be, if the ratio is 21, well, it's got to be 21.5, more than 21.5 before we'll add. And we've gotten into situations before where it's got to be a whole nother student before you add, because it will have an impact. And that's why if you just look at any given snapshot of student ratios, they can be different because of those. Unfortunately, all the kids don't come in nice little 21 buckets and where you can place them in the school. You have different,
And we have special
numbers.
programs that impact the numbers a little bit too.
right.
Immersion is one of them. That's why we try to start in kindergarten with 25-1 as the ratio in immersion, because we know as they are, go to 5th grade, kids move out of the system. You can't just put somebody in an immersion class. And so those numbers tend to get less and less as they get, upper grades. But I have a grandson that's in kindergarten immersion. We're not messing with immersion. We're going to make that happen. On an aside.
Okay, so I have one other thing just based off of this slide. So I know how hard it is just to recruit people to the profession. So once they're recruited to the profession, we got to recruit them to Lexington 1. So lots of surrounding districts do really great things to entice people to come to our district. Now, while we all love Lexington 1 and we think they should all come to Lexington 1, is our district doing anything that might...
Those student-teacher ratios would probably go further than anything else could possibly go. If we could advertise these ratios, I think that would help us so much in recruiting people into our district. The other thing we've talked about as a part of this coming budget is to look at first-year teachers, because a lot of times it's really difficult. I mean, first-year teachers make roughly $35,000 a year. It's hard to live in making a rent payment for an apartment if you'd have to have a roommate. And so we've talked about maybe starting this first-year teachers at whatever the third step would be, like it'd really be step 2. And so 0, 1, and 2 would be the same salary, but they would get that salary early. They won't get raises each year, but they would get that salary early. Aiken does that now. And so when they start publishing salaries for new teachers and they're recruiting with other districts, it looks like they're starting salaries a lot higher than ours. And so those are some things that we've talked about doing. I mean, obviously, we'd love to give, big salary increases, to our district. We've talked about doing sign-in bonuses. I think one of our strategies that we put forth this year was to think about what we did with the employee bonus. Now, he's told you how much that costs, but it would be kind of nice to have a retention bonus for all of our employees, similar to what we did this year for COVID. If we could make something like that happen again, that would be awesome. Because I do think those are the kinds of things that will get people's attention. I say this, Dr. Little said it repeatedly I say this all the time. I've been in 3 states, I've been in 4 districts. I promise you, our kids are phenomenal. They really are phenomenal. And I try to tell people that all the time. When somebody wants to complain about our kids, they shouldn't. Our kids are so compliant, and that's really a testament to our parents and to our community, because our parents expect their kids to behave in class. And so it gets into, we are very fortunate in Lexington 1, and we just need to do a really, really good job of selling that to people out in the public. And anyway, I feel strongly that we got what it takes. We just got to get them here, and we're going to do whatever we can to make that happen. And I'm going to shut up, Jeff, I promise.
You're good, Mike.
Well, of course, I came with a list, very many pages long. One of the first things that I have, speaking of bringing new teachers, I have heard that the new teachers don't get paid for the 5 days of training that they're required to attend before they sign their contracts.
No, we did the New Teacher Institute. We pay them a stipend to attend that.
They do get paid for, okay. Yeah. Of course, I think we need to look at our salary scale for all positions. Bus drivers are still at 24 years, and others are at 30.
That's one of our strategies that's in the budget. We would like to see the salary schedules go to 40 years across the board. Bus drivers, everybody, because they stop at 30. And
Right.
I'm proposing we do them across the board to 40. And we don't have that many people that work beyond 30. But, they should, that expertise is worth something, and we should pay them for it. So
And how far does the state salary schedule go?
24,
So above that, it's on us.
it's on us.
Okay.
But that's okay, we can make that happen.
Yes, we can. I would like some numbers for that. Mr. Salters, and you may not have these numbers today, CARES Act funds, how much of those have we got to date, and how much are we expecting to get?
So we've gotten what is it, roughly down to about 12 million? 2.6, yeah. So, roughly about, what, 16 million, 17 million total? And that's 3 different distributions of funding.
And that's not recurrent, it's one-time funding?
That is correct. And then we have heard that we can anticipate about 4 times that amount out of this new distribution. We don't have any information on that yet. And those, those funds, of course, are restricted. They have different spending criteria that you have to meet, and they also have different terms that they run out, like, September of this year, September next year, September 23. And so one of the big keys for that funding is recovery of lost instruction. And so a lot of, what we have looked at with that is summer institutes and really focusing this summer hard on catching students up. And our instructional services team has spent a lot of time working through that.
And that's going to be, just as an aside, that's going to be our April presentation. So we're going to walk through those federal dollars and how they're being targeted, and primarily, and I'm very thankful for this, that the summer programming is going to probably be, I would argue, our most intensive summer ever when it comes to summer programming. So we're going to have all kinds of opportunities for students to engage in almost an extended year. It's not going to exactly be like that, but it'll be pretty significant and intensive summer programming. So we're going to walk through that in April. As we look at our budget, because in April is really the budget where we get into it, that what that is, kind of what we've got left over there. But we do hope that the new funding, of course, we just don't know a lot about it yet. And we'll see what happens when it starts rolling out. But if we can utilize that to help offset some of our cost, we would certainly do that. The real question about federal dollars, and you just always need to remember about federal dollars, is it always has lots of strings attached to it. It has, as Mr. Schulter said, there's certain buckets it could be spent on. There's things we've had to make an argument and a case that it fits in certain places. A lot of our health room assistants, for example, was a case of that. We had to really make an argument that aligned with the bucket. And so if you can find some of those areas where there's some ambiguity, you can certainly argue some of that. But by and large, it's certainly more black and white, cut and dry when it comes to what can be spent on. So we'll be walking through some of those possibilities in April. And again, hopefully by April, we'll know more about the big, because that's now been a week or so since that's been passed. And we'll know more exactly about the next wave of funding.
Okay, but some of that money can also make up lost money in our budget, such as technology. I know some devices were purchased with that money.
Yeah, it has the ability, and as Dr. Ohl said, we'll walk you through that. We have done that where we've gone through, and if we made purchases, we made a bunch of PPE purchases out of general fund, and we reverse those back into CARES or ESSER money, and technology is also another area where that's the case. And so that can, the thing you have to be careful about, and I'll just say this again to everybody, you have to be careful replacing general fund expenditures with that money, and then you create this cliff in 2 or 3 years where you pulled all that stuff out of general fund, and now you got to go back and load it all back in at one time. And that can really bite you. So you have to be really careful about doing that. But it is an expenditure that is allowable.
Okay, and I know I had read something too, that the State Department of Education provided learning platforms or funding for that. I know that was a decent-sized chunk of change that came out of our...
You're talking about like Schoology or something like that?
Yeah,
or?
Canvas, Schoology, Blackboard, Google Classroom. So I know some things have been helpful that would usually come out of the general fund. Just moving along here. Increase sub pay and offer incentives, that's at near the top of my list. We have to increase sub pay. When we asked her in the last budget hearing, you said you couldn't remember the last time that
I'd have to go back and dig that up, yeah.
And also offer incentives. So I looked up a few things. In one district, They offer an incentive. If you substitute 10 times a month, you get a $150 bonus. 20 times a month is $300 bonus. And another local district here, they give pay bumps of between $25 and $35 a day. And they set the compensation at $95 to $115 for a day of work. I know currently, I have our pay scale somewhere, but we're still in like the 60-something dollar range for, yeah, here it is, for our substitutes. Yeah, so $68 a day with a 4-year degree and substitute teacher training. $63 a day with a high school diploma, and that's for substituting for a teacher. Health room assistants, $58 a day, just to give the board some kind of idea. Another incentive is subs who work more than 90 days in a local district. They're also included in the district's retention incentives. I'm not sure what those are. Subs who work 20 days a month are entered into a drawing to win a $500 bonus where 5 are chosen. And that's on top of existing policies such as $100 bonuses for substitute teachers who work 10 Fridays a year and long-term assignment bonuses of $15 a day for those in the classroom at least 15 days in a row. On to my next bullet point. As Mr. Stacy mentioned, and I had on here, don't maintain, but decrease class sizes. I had that in all caps. Because I know that, and I actually, Kathy, since you knew I'd share this with the old board, I went through and spent days and days and hours with a student to teacher ratio for each class in the district. I'll be glad to provide that to you. And that will give you a real idea of what our student to teacher ratio is. Do band directors get a stipend? I had that on my list and it's been there for months. They do.
Yes.
Okay. National Board Certification for teachers. I have a long list here about this. Let me see. I will, okay. Okay, so the state of South Carolina no longer provides incentives for National Board Certified teachers, but I think it's important that we encourage teachers to attain and renew their National Board Certification. You'll hear teachers say that becoming board certified is one of the best means of PD. So by investing in board certification, not only are we meeting our goal of highly qualified teachers in every classroom, but we're also providing professional development. We can do this by reimbursing cost and providing monetary incentives, which both Sumter and Lexington Richland 5 do to encourage teachers by using one or either both of those methods.
So we do give us a stipend for National Board, and I'm gonna not tell you the amount, but it's somewhere between $7,500 and $10,000. I can get that amount for you. And if you would send me some of those things that you bulleted, if you'll just send them to me, some of that stuff with substitutes and those incentives, we actually researched that a couple of years ago, and that was part of what we put forth in the budget. But again, when you see the dollar amount, you're going to see, I can do that, I can do this, I can't do it all. But I can, if you'll send me your bullets, the things I already have the numbers for, I can send them to you.
Okay, that would be great. So we are providing a stipend for all board certified teachers, even when they renew?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just texting Kimberly Freeman to find out.
We
She
do.
says it's 3,500 local and then the state if they qualify. And I think the state has reduced it. At one point it was 7,500 and I think it's working its way down to like 5,500 or maybe 5, something like that.
Okay. So we provide 3,500. Is that what you're, okay.
Lindsay's telling me 3,000. I'm getting two figures. I'm getting 3,500 from Kim Freeman and 3,000 from Lindsay.
Okay. Okay. So, I think a lot of the feedback that we could get going towards the budget would be just to kind of sit down and talk to teachers. I know here I have some notes from pizza and policy night. That was a long time ago, but I'm holding on to these forever. schools want a mental health counselor more than what they currently have. And one of the principals actually suggested that it needs to be needs-based because there are more mental health issues in high poverty situations. And mental health counselors for teachers that will be available during the hours that they can see them. Okay. I was looking up to see if you had any feedback on that, Mr. Stacy, but I'll keep moving. Electronic devices for teaching assistants. So what did we do with all of the old iPads and other devices that we replaced a year or two ago?
We sold the devices that we could get that were salvageable. But most of our teaching assistants now, I think we addressed that during the pandemic. We used some of the funding and have addressed that issue. So if they're in a classroom with students, they should have a device.
Okay. I'll check on that then. Oh, so in October 2020, just looking at the general ledger, we transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars from salaries to library books. I think this is something that we should at least include in our budget every year so that we don't have teachers supplying, their personal classroom library books every year. Like I know some of them had to give those out during the pandemic if they taught Lula. So that's just something that I think instead of, waiting on a bond referendum or something, that we have that as part of our budget. Let's see. Uniforms. I know you and I have talked a little bit about this, Mr. Salters. A recurring schedule for uniforms. Do any gate fees go towards those purchases? How is it decided how much of each account that pays, band, cheer, athletic? Like I said, this is things we can talk about later, but just these are ideas that I have. Paying the fees for cosmetology and other students at LTC. Since my daughter graduated from the cosmetology program, I really, that was a year ago, I can't remember exactly how much those fees were, but they were quite a few $100s. So I'm wondering, since we are paying fees for dual enrollment courses per student, if we couldn't also consider paying fees for cosmetology and other programs at LTC. And so LTC has a waiting list. And I talked to Mr. Myers, so he not only provided me with some much appreciated insight into our numbers here locally at LTC, but he also provided me a copy of the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment that 9 Midlands area CTE directors worked on this spring. And the report outlines the areas that are most needed in our community. For instance, the STEM field, diesel mechanics. Richland District 1 has a diesel mechanics program, while other districts do not. Companies met with an area CTE directors expressing need for help in the shortages with heavy equipment operations, plumbing, HVAC, and cost estimation. So I would like to look into expanding these course offerings. Welding, auto tech, cosmetology, building construction, and culinary arts. Mr. Meyer says those are consistently oversubscribed and have more requests than can be met. So although those students may know what they want to do when they graduate, and they could be certified, since we don't have the means and there's a wait list, then they either have to go on to college or, like some of the cosmetology students, just go to a cosmetology school afterwards. Let's see here. So I had put some stuff in there about the step increases. We've been over that. I'm sure there's a few other things. I'll see what else anybody else has. It might come to me. Oh, I do remember something else Mr. Stacy was saying. You said we need more teachers. Mr. Salter said we don't have anywhere to put them. So I just want to remind the board.
I said we have to verify we have somewhere to put them.
Right, or, yeah, okay, maybe that's what you said. That wasn't a quote. It was, we need somewhere to put them, we don't, yeah. So I just want to remind the board that this is where the board needs to look at bond referendum money. And so when the people voted on the bond referendum, that last line on that ballot gave the board the ability to spend any remaining funds on projects approved by the board. So When we have leftover money, we need to be looking at classroom additions, more programs for CTE, things of that sort, before we spend them on other things. Okay?
Thank you, Ms. Garris. Anyone else with comments about budget priorities that are on your to-do list?
I just have one question. From a budgetary perspective, what did we learn through COVID? And I don't, obviously we heard HR, but in the grand scheme of things, what did COVID kind of teach us that would be helpful as we prepare this next budget? And I say that to say, thinking from the highest level, we never thought we could do 2 recesses in a day. Well, lo and behold, we did 2 recesses. Kids loved it, worked great, all right? Doesn't necessarily, we'll continue to evaluate these things, but what did we learn from a budgetary?
Well, I'd like to respond, take a little bit of Mike's airtime. Because I'm passionate about several things. And one thing we learned is there's a digital divide. I think we learned that statewide, and I'm really pleased that Lexington 1 stepped up and took care of that.
Do you think we shored it up
I do, yes, sir. I think
effectively enough, or do you think we've got further to go?
I think we have a little ways to go, and we're working on that, but I think children who didn't have connectivity now have hotspots. We worked real fast on that. Also, we learned that children are resilient, sometimes more so than their parents. However, there's a consequence to that, and there's a huge need. I want the board to understand this. Next year, we need to really think about the social emotional needs of our children, because it's huge. And it might be masking itself right now, but I promise you next year is going to be a critical year for school counselors, for social workers. One of you said, you talked with a principal and they said, I need more social workers. We as a team have already talked about that. They're telling us that. We need more interventionists. And the bottom line is you can't have, everything can't be a priority. But I've always felt in my career, I have to keep my focus on what's best for students. And if you can make decisions based on that, you're doing a pretty good day's work. And our children, K-12 next year, are going to really need a lot of support. So those are things I think we learned. We also learned that our teachers can do more than they think they can do. It's amazing how they've improved their craft in a totally different world, very different from the way they were providing instruction. And you know what? We learned that doing IEPs via Zoom works. We'll probably never go back to 100% face-to-face IEPs with parents. I think Dr. Little will tell you, we've learned as a team that meeting with parents via Zoom meetings works really well. They get home from work late, they don't have to drive down to a central services place to meet, and they're very effective meetings. So I don't think we'll ever 100% do our work the way we've done in the past.
So would I be correct in saying that you think we're philosophically better off with our use of technology?
For some students, not for all.
Right, okay.
Is that fair?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the big question right now. It's facing everybody. We all kind of got plunged into this need for technology, and maybe we weren't quite prepared for it yet. And I don't mean just education, I mean multiple industries. And so anytime that happens, you have to kind of go back and evaluate it and say, well, are we better off because of it? What worked and what didn't? And so as we kind of paint the picture of what the next budget looks like, what type of precedent, where does that need to factor in? And how big is that divide, and how much did we close up, and how much more do we need to go?
Right.
So I would agree with Gloria, and I would want to emphasize this. The social, emotional piece of that is really, really important, and I think we learned that. And I can say this because I've been doing this for a long time. When I was a principal at a middle school in Savannah, Georgia in the 80s, we tried to do what we called teacher advisor. And it was the same thing, sort of like Crew now. We even wrote a curriculum for it, and we got so much resistance because teachers, I want to teach my subject. I don't want to have to do that stuff. I think this year our teachers have recognized how important that is. I don't hear people complaining about Crew. They want to do that. That's something they need to do. So to me, that's a real big win this year. And I agree with her with the travel. I think as our meetings, we've rethought some of our meetings. I do think it's important to have face-to-face meetings sometimes, but I do think that you can optimize your time, and we're always trying to give people back time, and we've learned that the technology will allow us to do that. So that's something else that we really gained from this process.
If I could just add, I think I always have to bring this up every time we have these conversations about technology, but we've added a lot of technology this year. And we've done it through CARES, and we've done it through other means, and what we need to do is we need to be strategic about how we plan to replace that technology, because we have, in a sense, built a cliff that in a short term will need to be recycled, and we're working on a plan for that. But I just want the board to be aware that, in 3 to 5 years, we're not going to hit the lottery again and get a bunch of federal funding coming in to replace, or we can't count on that coming in to replace all that equipment. But we rolled out a lot of equipment, and we have a very robust infrastructure, and our students have a lot of access. And our IT staff's been unbelievable, but it has created something that we need to really be preparing for in a few years, and that's going to be either to refresh all of that equipment or not. And I don't think the not is really going to be satisfactory, because as when we first started the first one-to-one implementations of the first devices, technology is just the way we do our work. It's not this, whiz-bang thing for, that's going to change the world. It's just how we do our work. It's like this phone or that, this pen that I'm holding and this piece of paper. I mean, it's just another component of our work toolkit. And so our students are using it, and they're very effective with it, and we're going to have to continue to provide it, and that's something we got to plan for.
I feel compelled to add to the conversation, since I'm the only one who hasn't spoken, except for Catherine. But we talked about the technology end of it, and are we philosophically better? Well, I think we're better than we were. And certainly in August, we had over 8,000 students who made the decision to stay home. Part of that was the unknown and fear and everything that came with this new thing we called a pandemic. But I'll remind you that we have, last time I looked, about 747 students, basically a school of 6th through 12th graders, who are going to continue that platform next year. So we did something right with some of those folks. So while it's not going to be in the thousands, we could very easily come close to 1,000 this coming school year. With respect to Ms. Garris's comment about the mental health counselors, I think we currently have 16 or 17 that we do contract through Lexington County Mental Health. So they're not our full-blown employees. They're contracted out at $20,000 apiece. So in the scheme of a huge budget, that's not a huge cost, but we always have competing priorities. I don't know what the talent pool is like at Lexington County Mental Health, but that's certainly something we should look at, and we'll continue to look at if we do need to increase that. It's not a tremendous amount of money, again, when you're looking at a $300 million budget to add those folks at some of our more needy locations, should they be available to do that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's something that we always want to look into, because the social and emotional support, while we've always said it was important, it has really shown to be important. And you even mentioned to the point about for our adults, for the employees, and we have a new employee program that reaches out to employees who need that kind of assistance. So we're making steps. So what we've learned those things. That's what we've learned. We've learned about handling the severe discipline problems. What may have been points in the past where we, I hate to say it this way, but look for reasons to get them out of class. And I don't really believe we did that overtly, but I think we've stepped back and looked for reasons and ways to keep them in class, because class time was so important, more so this school year than ever. So moving forward, we would like to incorporate some of those same strategies once we get back to whatever we consider to be normal. And maybe there's more discipline strategies, maybe there's more ways that we can reach those kids on the front end, because we've always talked about trying to get to the why of the problem and not just the what. So lots of lessons learned, and we'll learn more tomorrow.
So sort of a consistent theme is a post-COVID budget is social emotional. I mean, is that a fair assessment from your seats? That's what you see. Okay. Mr. Salters, you and I have a very similar job, 8 to 5, in that we're the no guy. Everybody wants $1, we say no. I'll give you a quarter, but no. And it is, as Mr. Caldwell was pointing to, there is a prioritization that has to occur at some point. You have to make a choice, and that's the hard part. That's why, I've always challenged my employees where we're at, is that we just don't look at the numbers, that we use the numbers to tell a story. And I'm a very big fan of putting it through the filter or the lens that we're looking at. And so our lens is our strategic plan at the end of the day. So if we were to take our strategic plan and we were to filter our budget through that, and see what comes out of that. Now, it's a completely radical way of approaching how you would develop a budget. It doesn't mean that you take away the nuts and bolts of it, but that's the lens that you look at it through. And I would say that we have been themed in the past with our budgets. Some budgets focused on safety, some budgets focused on teacher salary. It sounds like one of the concerns here recently is social emotional, in the post-COVID. So that would be my only recommendation, is that we just don't go back to the way we used to do things. We all want to get back to normal, but at the same time, we want to take what we've learned this past year and, get rid of the sacred cows that we don't need, and begin to really kind of develop a budget through that lens, if you will. That would be my only recommendation.
Well, I wanted to mention, and I almost didn't bring this up, but as y'all were responding to Dr. Guyton, I decided that I was. So one of my priorities, and I don't even know if this is truly a budget matter, but I think I think the budget would dictate whether it could be done or not, is one of the things that I received the most positive feedback from throughout this whole the 2020-2021 school year was starting the school year in cohorts, elementary and high school. And I think that plays right into this social and emotional support that we want our students to have. I mean, my friends that are high school teachers, they loved having small groups of their students that they could get to know each day during that first week or 2 weeks. And if there was any way that we could incorporate that into our re-entry into the next school year, I think that would really establish those relationships, those on-campus relationships that we want our students to have and our teachers want to have. And as kind of a part of that, one of the other things that I think was just a real serendipity in that really dry summer that we had last year was the drive-bys that our teachers did to our students. Kids love to see the adults in their lives show up. And if there was some way that we could build in, a little bit like the supply funds, but some capability for teachers to be able to, especially the elementary teachers, to be able to make home visits for that, for a couple weeks before school starts, drop off, read this book before you come to class and we'll read it on the first day. Some sort of a capability for them to have that first touch point with our students on the students' home base, rather than, through just an open house or a drop-in. And then I wanted to echo about the face-to-face meetings. I have been through, with my 3 children, my youngest will be 16 tomorrow, 13 IGPs. And this year's Zoom IGP was the only one that I would give a thumbs up to. It was fantastic. IGPs, parents have to take the day off. The student comes out of class. You're sitting across from the guidance counselor, and they've got something on their screen that the parent and the student can't see it. We did it on Zoom. The guidance counselor threw it up on the screen, and he could walk us through. I mean, it was glorious. So keeping the virtual IGPs is definitely 100% a go. But I really appreciate what y'all are doing as far as helping us kind of adjust our lens. I do think that our strategic plan always drives our budget. But that's not always obvious that it drives our budget because the strategic plan is our roadmap for how, and the budget is the fuel in the car. I think that's an analogy that you used once, Jeff. And I think that maybe this year has put us all in different seats in the car. And so what we're seeing as we're going is a little bit different. And I think that might not be a bad thing. And so maybe we're looking at the power skills and the softer things and the whole kid, the whole student, and the whole teacher. These teachers that are, like you said, Dr. Talley, they were always capable, but that we have seen them be extraordinarily capable and excel in completely new ways that they weren't even sure that they could accomplish. All the while, they're also exhausted and scared and always learning. And so, anything that we can do to wrap services around our teachers to support them, whether it's making sure that we have substitutes that are well paid enough that teachers can find a sub when they need one. I mean, that's a huge thing. The mental health counselors for our teachers, the opportunity, maybe support groups, or I know a number of teachers that have used the calming room that our counseling department created. Really push those services and those opportunities out to our teachers. I think would be a really great thing. So, does anybody have any other questions or comments about budget priorities? No? Anybody else? Everybody? Everybody awake?
Madam Chair, I would just point out that, we're going to be bringing first reading back to you guys April 20th. So as we're going to be working really hard over the next month to pull some of these ideas and concepts together and put numbers on them. And, we'll need to make sure we get feedback from you guys over that time frame. And we'll certainly work hard to give you a first reading that you can react to. And of course, that's always just a conversation starter, and then we can go from there.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Salters, and thank you to your team. All right, board, we're on to agenda item 12.0, items for information, for your information. You have seen that the monthly general fund reports that we receive are attached to your board packet. I would also like to let you know that after announcing the need for board members to serve on the Lexington Education Foundation Board last month, 3 of our members have expressed an interest in serving on the foundation board. Mr. Mike Anderson, Ms. Kathy Henson, and Dr. Kyle Guyton their names have been forwarded to the foundation board, and the foundation board will be voting on their membership on their board of directors at their next meeting on Thursday. Let's see. All right, we have just a couple seconds. Back in February, Ms. Henson and I attended the South Carolina School Board Association's annual convention. It was extremely socially distanced. A very limited number of people attended. We sat further apart than y'all are here. We wore masks the whole time. We pretty much had an entire hotel to ourselves. I mean, a group of 300 met in the very, very biggest ballroom. But I asked Ms. Henson to share just a little takeaway that she got from her first School Board Association conference.
Yes, I'll take just a couple minutes. Just to start off, our first open session was so exciting. We were like proud parents because Pillion High School's orchestra virtually played for the whole South Carolina School Board Association. So that was really neat. We were proud of them for that. But just some highlights for me. One of the keynote speakers was Sarah Gams, who's the South Carolina Teacher of the Year. And she just spoke with so much passion in front of the South Carolina School Boards Association, just from the heart of a teacher. And it just really echoed what I know a lot of our teachers here in our district feel as well. Anton Gunn, he is an author, motivational speaker. He came and spoke, and he just really encouraged us as leaders to listen and to learn and to ask questions and understand. So it just really kind of, I can send you some information that he presented. It was really great. And then there were lots of breakout sessions. We went to one on equity, strategic planning, the South Carolina High School League, which was interesting to go to. And then some other school boards brought their school board and their superintendents, and they just presented about being like a strong board and a strong superintendent, how working together is important. And there's lots of other stuff. But just as a new school board member, it was really nice to be able to go and meet other school boards in our state and other leaders in our state. And so I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. And before we adjourn, I just wanted to give a real big shout out to River Bluff High School's men's basketball team. They won the state championship this past weekend. And I just wanted to take a minute. So did you know the lower state championship game last week, the two coaches were Ben Lee and Brett Jones from Dutch Fork High School. And then the state championship game, the coaches were Ben Lee and Thomas Ryan from Dorman High School. All three of those coaches are products of Lexington High School's basketball program, and they all came up under Coach Bailey Harris. And I just think that's an incredible legacy that he has established. And not only did he raise up these fine men, they're now mentoring other fine men. So I just think that's a really neat, kudos to Coach Harris. He's retired, but I just think that that's a great legacy of the Lexington High School basketball program. So, Board, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I have a comment about the Educational Foundation appointment. I would just like to make sure it's made clear to them. I know we don't have any policies regarding how we appoint their members, but in their bylaws, our board must actually vote on the replacements. So I know you said you forwarded those over there. I would just like it made clear that when those make it over there, that they know that those have not actually been voted on by our
Actually,
board.
their bylaws state that we designate.
Well, in an email from their executive director, she says, because you and I had several conversations about this back in January, she says, moving forward and in closely reading the Educational Foundation's bylaws, I understand that the School Board of Trustees must actually vote on the Foundation's trustees replacement.
And she actually interpreted that wrong. She has since consulted with an attorney, and their bylaws don't bind our actions. And so it just says designate, in which we've done, and they vote, but their bylaws do not have any.
Okay, I just want to make sure that they understand that when those come over there, they didn't come by a vote of the board.
Would you like to serve on the foundation board?
No, I don't want to serve.
Okay,
on
then I think we have
got my hands full
designated
here.
3 members to serve. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Thank you. We're adjourned.